All right, y'all, so in this video, I'm gonna show you how to make your own custom object. I don't know why my highlighter's not yellow. Make your own custom object in Scene. And the advantage of making your own custom object is just you can do anything you want with it. So rect objects are great if you want them to remember their position and their width and their height, but that's it. Anything else, whether it's a speed or color or hit points, experience, ammo, damage count, whatever, rect objects don't have the ability to remember those. And so if you're going to put a whole bunch of these things in a list and write the same rules from over and over and over again, rect objects are going to be pretty limited to just remembering these. So if you're only making stars scrolling through the background or clouds or something that's just a simple little object that you need to write a set of rules for, yeah, rect objects are great. But this would be a lot more useful if you're going to make like a player character or an enemy character or something that has more than just a position and a size to remember. And so if I wanted to show you like this one, for example, all right, I've written a custom object called a dot, and each of these dots can remember their own size and position. And I'm just swiping my finger around on the screen right now. I can actually use two fingers at the same time. That's pretty cool. They're also remembering their color, their transparency. They each have a random speed in the horizontal and the vertical direction. This would be darn near impossible to do with the rect object. And so what I'm going to show you all today is how to go about doing that. I'm going to make my scene file, but rather than just starting from a blank one, I'm going to take my template right here, and we'll just call it, I don't know, you can call it whatever you want. I'm going to call mine custom 2 because I already have a file called custom that I showed you. When you make your scene template on here, there's a couple things I'm going to get rid of. I don't plan to use that function. That's telling Python what to do if you switch from portrait to landscape, and I'm not going to. I'm also going to just get rid of this whole if name equals main business, and so yeah, I want to name mine too. So we'll just call this one, I don't know, Randy equals my scene. Oops, and then I'm going to tell it to run Randy. So when I hit play on here, it should bring up a black screen, nothing special. The idea is that inside of setup, and I'm going to show you the same way that I made that bubble thing right there. I'm going to have self.bubbles, sure, is an empty rect, or is an empty list right there. Initialize list of bubbles. And I'm going to come through here, I'm going to say for each in self.bubbles, I'm going to draw and move each one. Down here, I'm going to say new equals whatever. Every time I touch the screen, actually let's have it in touch moved. So I'm going to come down here and say new equals, well, here's where I'm going to make my bubble, my custom object, and then I'm just going to say Kyle, you can type self.bubbles.append each. So this is going to set up almost the exact same way as our rect objects. I've got the list of all the things that I want to do. I'm telling each one of them every 60th of a second in my update list saying, hey, for each of those things I want you to draw it and move it and do whatever. And I'm going to use touch move to say every time my finger swipes across the screen, I want to make a new instance of this object and I'm going to add it to the list. What's different is that I'm not going to use a rect object. Instead, I'm going to make my own little custom object that can remember its x and its y and its width and its height and its color and its speed and everything else. To do this, I actually have to start up here above the scene. All right, this is important here. You're going to make custom objects outside of class my scene. And I think you have to do it before. I don't think you can do it afterwards. It doesn't, well, we'll find out. What I'm going to do is come through and say class, and then I'm going to make a bubble. And it is just a generic object. So this line looks an awful lot like this sign. The difference is on this line, I'm modding or I'm customizing a scene object. Right? I'm telling it that whatever scene was, I'm going to mod that. So it'll know to include update and setup and all that stuff. Here, I'm making just a generic object. And by saying, it's an object and not a scene or a rect or a list or something, it's empty. It's vanilla and it's boring. All right, so here's going to be the DNA. All right, this is the rules. It follows when a bubble, you can type, is born. The first function that you need to write in your custom object is the init function, and it's really weird because it has double underscores before and after. I could get into why it needs to be that way. Don't worry about it. So I'm going to define double underscore init double underscore self. When I come down here and call this new object, when I come in here and say, oh, I'm going to make, a new bubble, it's going to look in this function to figure out, great, what pieces of information do I need to remember? All right, these are the attributes each bubble has. And so I'm going to come in and I'm going to give it a bunch of attributes. It's going to have an X and a Y and a width and a height and all that other stuff. But here's the important thing. This self right here belongs to my scene. This is Randy's self. So Randy will have a bubbles list, and Randy will have, background color and all that other stuff. If I want my individual little bubbles to remember their own things, well, we're going to use self again, but these selves apply to the bubble. So I'm going to come through and say self.x equals something, and self.y equals something, and self.width equals something, self.height equals something, I don't know, let's just do color. So self.r, self.g, self.b. All right. So I've got the ability now to make a bubble that can remember all 7 of those characteristics. And what the heck, let's give it one more. I'm just going to give it a velocity in the x direction. So you can go through and manually say for each of these, yeah, I want these all to be at 100. You could say, I want their y coordinates to be at some random position. So let's just do some random place on the screen. So somewhere between 0 and, I'm in landscape mode, so 834. So every time I make a new bubble, it's going to show up somewhere randomly between 0 and 834. And I'll do that too with my x coordinate, random.randint, let's say 0, and my screen is 1112 wide. I want these things, let's make them all the same height. So we'll make them all 30 tall, we'll make them all 45 wide, and for the colors, let's make them all random colors. So random is going to give me a number between 0 and 1, a ugly looking decimal place, and I'm going to do that for the G and the B as well. So I'm going to have each of these dots will show up in a random spot, they'll all be the same size, and they'll all have a random color. And then excuse me, let's just make it have a random speed. Let's have maybe like a random uniform speed. Here's just another funky, rand int up here gives you a whole number between those ranges. Uniform gives you a decimal spot between, let's just say, -10 and +10. So some of these will go off flying to the left, some of these will go off flying to the right, right? So when I come down here and say, make a new bubble, right? There it is, make a new bubble right there. It's going to generate this object and it will assign it those 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah, those 8 coordinates, a pair of location, a pair of size, 3 colors, and a speed. So now I can come into my list right there and say, okay, what do I want to do for each of these bubbles? Well, I want to draw it. So let's set the fill color, each.r, each.g, each.b. Notice that I'm not using self, I'm using each here, because for each of the bubbles that are in my list, I'm going to fill it with its own color. And I'm just going to draw them as circles, each.x, each.y, each.width, each.height. By the way, some of you guys that stuck around last week that learned that notation with the asterisk, that's not going to work here because the asterisk unpacks all the variables. So with rect, it's only x, y, width, and height, and so it just unpacks those 4. If I use that asterisk notation here on ellipse, it would try and put all 8 of these variables into this ellipse drawing function, and Python would get mad at you. So sorry, you got to do it by hand. So let's see if this thing works now. When I hit play, every time each is not defined. Oh, sorry. I need to append the new one. Duh. Sorry, new is the variable name I give it. So each time I tap the screen, every time I swipe my hand on the screen, sorry, it's creating a new dot somewhere on here. So all of these are showing up in random locations, and they all have random colors. They're all the same size, they're all the same width, they're all the same height, but they just have random colors. Let's take a look, though, at what happens when we start moving these things. What I'm going to do is say each.x equals each.x plus each.v. So each one of these has its own speed, and it's going to be keeping track of its own location and its own speed, and you can see that they're all moving on there, right? So I swipe the screen, I generate, I'm just populating so many of these things on screen right now, and they're all moving with their own fill color, their own location, their own speed, and everything else. And it looks like they're slowing down right now. They're not slowing down. It's just the ones that were moving fast have already left the screen. The only ones that are left are the ones that are going slow. It's a little bit of an optical illusion right there. All right, so that's it. That's how you make a custom class of object. But here's the fun part. You don't have to just say, make a bubble. Just like when we learned functions way back in September and stuff, you might want to make a bubble and be real specific about one of these characteristics. For example, right now, I'm just telling these things to randomly show up anywhere when I swipe on the screen. What I might want to do is tell it to be created where I swipe. And so to do that, I can put information right here inside of that those parentheses. And I can say, hey, bubble, when I make you, right here on this line, I'm gonna make a new bubble, and I want you to use some information that I'm giving you right now. So I might wanna say, when I make this bubble, I might wanna tell it where to put it. I might wanna put an X and a Y location inside of this thing. Well, the easiest thing for me to do would be to say, I want this bubble to show up where my fingertip is. Like as I drag my finger across the screen, I want that bubble to show up where that is. And so I can come in here and say, I want you to make a bubble at my X location of my touch and the Y location of my touch. Now, when I hit play, it's going to say something about unexpected arguments or something like that. It's not happy about this. And the reason it's not happy about this, see, right there, it takes one positional argument through a given. It's saying, yo, what is this? What is it? You never told me to expect any information. What's going on here? Right? Well, up here in my initialize function, I need to tell it, bubble, when I command you to be born, I'm going to give you some information. And I'm going to give you an X and I'm going to give you a Y. Or you can call it Fred, you can call it George, whatever. But what I'm telling it here is to expect two pieces of information. When I initialize you, so when I initialize you right here, I'm going to make you, and I want you to listen to me. I'm going to tell you two things. The two things that I'm going to tell you are going to be a pair of coordinates. I can come down here then and tell it, yo, here's the information that I want you to remember. I want your X value, I want your X coordinate to be equal to the first number that I give you up here. And I want your Y coordinate, to be equal to the second number that I give you right there. So the difference that we did between the last one and this one is instead of just making a dumb bubble with nothing in the parentheses, here I'm saying I'm going to give you two pieces of info, and the two pieces of info just happen to be the X and Y coordinates of wherever my fingertip is right there. When you're born, I'm expecting to give you two pieces of info, you're expecting to get two pieces of information, and here's what we're going to do with it. You're going to take the first one, save it as your X value, you're going to take the second one, save it as your Y value. So now when I swipe, these things are all going to be made wherever my fingertip lands on the screen. Okay, so instead of just randomly showing up somewhere, they're going to show up wherever my fingertip goes. Now, if we wanted to adjust some more things on here, let's give it another velocity value. We'll give it an X value, and we'll give it a Y value. And I'm just going to copy them, actually. I'm going to make them the exact same thing here. So now I can come down and update and say, well, I want each one's X position to grow by its X velocity, and I want each one's Y position to grow by its Y velocity, like so. So now, every time my finger swipes on the screen, I'm going to create a new bubble that remembers it knows to be born where my fingertip is. It remembers its own color and its own X and its own Y and its own speeds. And because they have the ability to remember all this information, I'm able to produce a pretty cool looking effect right here. Right? And that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, is the basis of how to make your own custom object. Everything that goes on inside the scene is not really any different than the way we've did it with rect objects before. You make a list, you use some sort of event, whether it's a touch or a time or a tilt or something to add things to the list, and then you just write a for loop inside an update that says, yo, for each of these things, here's what I want you to do. I want you to draw it, I want you to move it. The difference is, instead of using a rect object, you come up here before your scene and you make your own custom thing. I'm going to make a custom class of just a generic object right here. I'm going to write the init function, which basically says, when you're born, here's the variables I want you to remember. If you're going to give an information when it's born, you list off the 2 or 3 or 4 or however many things that you're going to tell it inside the init function, and then you can just define each of these variables here, each of these attributes here for your object that you can reference down here inside of update. Pretty nifty little effect. I can get these things all moving around the screen. Of course, if I wanted to make them bounce, that'd be pretty easy too. But that'll be the very last skill check, y'all. So that's it for custom objects. We'll have time in class to answer any questions about them.